A friend of mine phoned me and said, if you want some 2-litre spares, Alec, there's been a nasty barn fire and the barn had collapsed on top of the car. When I first saw the car, and the old gentleman who had owned it for many years, he was very, very distressed. The body had disappeared, the chassis had been twisted, every aluminium casting had melted. I eventually loaded it on a trailer, took it home and proceeded to take it to pieces bit by bit and thought, well, I don't know, there is a chance with this. Over a period of 4 years, I rebuilt the car. I used to come home from work, have my dinner rather quickly and straight out into the garage. Sometimes I'd finish at 10 or 11, another time it'd be 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. No way did I walk away from the car and think, I'll put that split pin in tomorrow. It was always finished. The headlamps nod, they'll say good morning if you want them to say good morning to you. There are 2 clusters of grease nipples, one on either side of the car, and from those there are copper pipes running to each of the moving parts on your steering and springs, etc. When I drive along with this, it does give you a feeling of elation, and also the fact that I know that this is the car which I built, albeit from bits supplied by Lagonda many years ago. I've put every single thing back on this car which was possible to take to pieces, restored or rebuilt to as good as new.
2 litre was Lagonda's biggest success. And then at the beginning of 35, the 30 mile an hour limit came in and driving tests and all sorts of new rules, and the sports car market just evaporated again. And Lagonda's market went with it. No, it was a total overreaction. It would have come back, but by then the bank had had enough and pulled the plug out, and they went into receivership. But they had made the previous autumn 3 short M45s for racing, which had done exceptionally well in the Ulster TT, entered them for Le Mans and actually won it while they were in receivership. The receiver now got a completely different animal. He got a Le Mans winning company to sell. And he went back to the bidders and said, you must pay me more than that. And only one of them agreed. And that was Alan Good, who was a sort of company doctor of the period. And he'd signed up W.O. Bentley as a designer, because W.O. was working as fast as he could on his masterpiece, which was going to be the V12.
This car is a Lagonda-bodied V12 drop-head coupe, they were called in those days, a 4.5 litre engine. This car actually was sold in May 1938. It's unusual in that it has a short-stroke engine. Nearly all the engines made in this country at that time were long-stroke because of the tax system. The tax was based on the bore of the cylinders, and as this car is short-stroke, it has a big bore, and the tax on it was, I think, £48 a year, which was approximately equal to the wages of a living-in domestic servant at the time. Puts it into context. It's much more like a modern car. The engine has a sort of turbine smoothness when it's going around fast. It's a fast car, but above about 80 it takes time to wind it up. It'll still do its 100. I once had it going at 115, and it was very steady at that speed. This was the fastest production car made in the UK when it was produced. If you drive it fast, it comes down to about 11 miles per gallon, and if you drive it slowly, you might get 12.5. So there's not any incentive to drive it slowly. I always make it keep going. I think they were probably bought by companies for their chairman and chief executives to go around. And then this car, in fact, was the company car for the managing director of Horlicks in 1938. I think it's got a lot of very appealing features, the beautiful sweeping lines. of the detail work is quite exceptional. This panel here has got inset silver in it. The door handles, or a lot of the fittings, are quite special and mostly very attractive. I'll show you the Art Deco cigar lighter, made of pre-war plastic. I think it did Lagonda a power of good. I think that it transformed it from being regarded as a manufacturer of a slightly tired six-cylinder sports car design into being a really up-to-date, very special car.
Car production had to stop in September 1939 when the war broke out. Lagonda specialised in flamethrowers. The most successful was probably the Crocodile, which was a tank of jelly petrol towed behind a tank. W.O. Bentley hadn't had a lot to do during the war insofar as what they were making, because they were being designed by other people. And he was secretly designing the 2.6, his post-war car, so that they had a prototype on the road practically on VJ Day. But they couldn't get a steel allowance. It's a very complicated story, but they couldn't get a steel allowance to build it, so they had plenty of money, but not able to make cars. And Alan Good resigned, and the new owners put the company up for sale. And David Brown, who'd got Aston Martins by then, but wasn't too happy with their engine, bought the company really to get hold of this engine design and put the car into production. Now, unfortunately, he fell out with W.O. Bentley almost at once, and W.O. left to set up his own consultancy. The next Lagonda model was in 1961, the Rapide, but the next Lagonda of any note came out in 1976, and this was a complete eye-opener, the William Townes car, quite unlike any other car on the market before or since.
When the car came out, it took the motoring world by storm, totally futuristic, and never had anything been seen like it before. It is very much razor edge design, very sharp. The edges later were softened, I personally think, to the detriment of the car, because this is how the car was designed in its purest form, as a pure piece of architecture on wheels. The electronics of the time were totally futuristic, damn dare comic stuff. You needed a 2-day course to fly the car before you could actually drive it.
Oil overheating.
The car is internally trimmed with best Conley hide in true tradition of Lagonda and Aston Martin. It is a direct competitor, no doubt, to the Bentley and Rolls-Royce and other marques such as that. But we have with this car Ferrari performance and Rolls-Royce comfort, grace with pace. I initially came by this particular car after suffering withdrawal symptoms from having a previous Lagonda for 8 years, and within 6 weeks I couldn't live without one. So I made contact with a colleague of mine in London who found this particular car, which was a subject of a receivership, and therefore I managed to acquire the car at receivership price.
They were good cars, but that market dried up in 1990, and since then there hasn't been a Lagonda except the Vignale, which was really an eye-catcher for the Geneva show a couple of years back, which wasn't seriously meant to be a production car. Well, we hear that there might be another Lagonda, and we hope there will be. Certainly people at the factory at Aston Martin Lagonda at Newport Pagnell seem keen to do a Lagonda. They feel there's a market for the chap who's had all the Bentleys and would like something different. And certainly in the small production they would have in mind, it would be different. Quite what form it will take, we haven't the faintest idea, but we hope so.
The marque hopefully is far from dead. Lagonda, along with Aston Martin, will go hopefully now from strength to strength, with people still prepared to pay fairly astronomical sums of money for this type of car and this type of motoring.